make a statement later today. I don't think Douglas Ross is in any position to be giving political advice to anyone. But what I would say is that we have taken a consistently cautious approach that has borne out well in terms of the statistics, because Scotland continues to have lower rates of infection, hospitalisation, and higher rates of vaccination. So we are the highest in the UK, and also second in the world in terms of boosters. So we will continue to be led by the science and take its scientific advice, in contrast to the UK Prime Minister, who's been often politically influenced in his decisions over health policy by his backbenchers.
I'll come to that in just a moment with Miriam. You say the restrictions have actually made a difference in terms of COVID cases, but actually cases per 100,000 were higher in Scotland than in England on the 7-day rolling average in weeks ending the 30th of December and the 6th of January, when those extra restrictions had come into place. So that rather challenges your claim that they've worked.
As a snapshot, but across the piece, I think you'll find that we have done better. And the latest ONS
when you say
data
across
shows...
the piece, Hannah, what do you mean? I mean, so, that is one of the most used statistics, which is cases per 100,000. And I mean, I have them here. They are higher than England. So
the latest ONS data shows that only 1 in 20 people in Scotland have been infected, whereas in England it's been 1 in 15. So, you know, you can cut the data in different ways. And let's not forget, there's a huge amount of unpredictability. But I think people in Scotland trust the First Minister and the science to make the right decisions. Well, and we won't always get it right, but we will do it with the best of intentions and being led and advised by the science. Unlike the Prime Minister, who is not only losing trust, you know, significantly from the public, but also from his own colleagues.
Miriam?
Well, I actually think that the Prime Minister has done very well in not introducing any additional restrictions just before Christmas. I mean, I voted against Plan B. I don't think we needed it. I think that's been borne out by the evidence. But I'm very pleased that he didn't go down the route of introducing more restrictions. And again, I think he's been proved right in doing that. England is probably the freest country in Europe. And we are on the brink now of moving from pandemic to endemic, which is absolutely fantastic. And hopefully we'll see all restrictions move. But I think, you know, it's very interesting what Hannah says. And I think this kind of describes the whole problem throughout the pandemic. It's easy to look at case rates, infection rates, vaccinations, but actually that isn't the whole picture. And as a scientist, what frustrates me is how some of these figures have been plucked out without context. So you look at, a number of cases, the day that we apparently had the greatest case rate. Well, first of all, that wasn't a rate. A rate is a number divided by another number, sorry to be a science teacher. But also that is completely out of context of how many tests were conducted, why they were. You can't compare that to any previous point in the pandemic.
You want to charge people for tests, so that's going to affect the data as well.
I think there are lots of questions here about, we've said we're following the science, but actually I think that's a little bit misleading, because we're following some pieces of data which don't give us a complete picture. I think that's been the problem throughout this crisis, but I do think that we're moving absolutely in the right direction in England, and I hope to see all the restrictions gone soon.
Right. I mean, you say the Prime Minister made the right call. There are plenty of people who would say he didn't really have any other option. He did actually want to be more cautious, but it was your Conservative colleagues who agree with you that stopped him doing that.
Well, isn't that the point of parliamentary democracy, that MPs have a say? And I think there's a debate in Westminster Hall this afternoon, actually, looking at the impact of modelling throughout the crisis that I'm hoping to speak in. And time and time again, we've seen these models produced which have been very influential in the decisions that have been made, that have been wrong by whole orders of magnitude almost every time. So I think the questions we need to ask are, how are we using these models? What other alternatives are being presented? And I do think the Prime Minister made absolutely the right call this time.
Right. Well, I mean, Hannah, it's interesting about the price being paid, to paraphrase what Miriam has said, because the ONS, who you quoted, the Office for National Statistics, estimated that about 7% of the English population had COVID broadly over that December up until January, 0.6% of the Scottish population. So, yes, fewer people in Scotland, but for those extra restrictions. The Nighttime Industries Association claims Scottish hospitality businesses took a £1 billion hit over Christmas due to cancellation of party bookings. In your mind, was it a price worth paying?
I don't think it's about whether it's a price worth paying. I think it's about how we balance these decisions and recognising that everybody in every government across the world has had to try and balance these decisions in the middle of, a pandemic like nobody has experienced in our generation. And I think that it's so important that people have faith in the decision makers. And, you know, I have many constituents and many businesses in my constituency who have suffered through this. And what's very clear is that our government in Scotland has absolutely bent over backwards to give the support that's been appropriate, and versus the UK government, who has consistently fallen foul of its own members and not put in place the support that has been needed for many
Where is the
businesses.
evidence for that, Hannah? You look at things like furlough, you look at all the support that businesses got. I mean, it's fine to criticise the government, but I think you actually need to have evidence for that to show how people have been supported.
I'll give you my evidence, John. So businesses in Scotland won't pay any rates again until April this year, and businesses in England had to start paying them last summer. So, you know, that's just one of the measures, and we're doing it with one hand tied behind our back because we don't have the economic levers to borrow.
You have an awful lot of levers, but we won't go into exactly the ones you have and would like. Let me just show you this headline in The Guardian, because it may be the case. Jess, you could tell us about the story. All COVID restrictions in England could end in March under number 10 plans. There is also a review at the end of January on the Plan B restrictions that are currently in place, which broadly is about masks indoors and in classrooms for school children and working from home guidance. But tell us about this ending completely at the end of March.
Yes, so we're expecting Plan B to end next week, or probably the announcement to come directly after the Sue Gray report, as Nick might say. But this is the sort of the medium-term aim, which is that the Coronavirus Act is up for renewal, and you know, this could also affect some of the other linked kind of legal restrictions, legal guidance as well. Particularly, I think the point that might be the most controversial is ending the legal mandate to self-isolate if you have COVID, even if you test positive. Even though that's been shortened to 5 days quite recently. I think that's the one that will probably make people, you know, the most uneasy. I mean, the sources we spoke to for the story said there are obviously some powers the government might want to keep, and a lot of the powers to deal with COVID actually come from the Public Health Act anyway, but it would be a really strong, mainly what it would be is a really strong signal of intent to the public and to Tory MPs that by repealing this act, we are moving into that endemic phase. I think that there will be a lot of debate either way if that's the way the government goes, but it's definitely its intention.
Right. Is the pandemic in the rearview mirror now, Miriam?
I hope it will be very soon.
Hannah?
I hope so, but we have to go on the advice of the science.
All right, we're going to move on. In Scotland, a health and wellbeing survey has been introduced in schools. The questions on it concern a wide range of topics, including bullying, career aspirations, but more controversially, the sexual activity of those aged 14 and above. Let's introduce Lucy Whitehouse, who runs a sex education charity, Fumble, for young people. Welcome to you. Lucy, why is this a good idea to ask those sorts of personal questions of teenagers?
Thanks for having me. Yes, so we at Fumble, we're a digital relationships and sex education charity that works with young people to create everything we do. And we really believe that any activity that opens up lines of communication between young people and that parent policymaker generation that supports them is a fantastic thing.
Right. Some of the questions on the survey, as I've said, are quite detailed. I'm going to read the part that has proved very controversial with some people. We can show the page here. It says people have varying degrees of sexual experience. How much, if any, sexual experience have you had? And it goes on to say some experiences, but no sexual intercourse, more experiences, including oral sex, vaginal or anal sex, prefer not to say. Can you understand why some parents in Scotland have expressed concern about this?
I think it's important to say two things in response to that. One is the nature of the survey and how it's been set out and you know, presented to young people is they don't have to take the survey. Nobody has to take it. All of the questions can be skipped if they don't want to take any of the questions. So it's important to bear that in mind when we're talking about the content of the survey. And we at Fumble really, really believe in listening to young people because they're facing unprecedented challenges, particularly in a digital age. Growing up alongside the internet is something that the adult parent policymaker generation didn't experience, and we really need to listen to them because the challenges they're facing are challenges that are unprecedented and they need support.
Right, including questions like that.
Yeah, definitely. We need to understand the realities that young people are facing today. And I think at Fumble, we're excited to see work like this being done, particularly led by a government, because we really believe that for too long, we haven't been listening to young people about the issues that they're facing when it comes to intimacy, when it comes to relationships, be that romantic or friendships, and all of that's related to their well-being as well. So we think of it as really a basic public health thing.
Right.
Yes.
All right. Well, there's been criticism. I'm going to just show you this story in The Guardian. It says Nicola Sturgeon urged to scrap census asking teenagers about anal sex. Chief of Scottish Parents Organisation says health and wellbeing survey not fit for purpose. Now, a number of councils, Hannah, in Scotland have said they will not have their pupils take part in the survey. Are you going to think again about it?
In what respect?
Are you going to take the survey away? Are you going to...
No, I mean, the First Minister has been very clear that you can't stick your head in the sand. And as Lucy rightly says, and very eloquently puts, young people don't have to answer these questions if they don't want to. I think it's regrettable that a number of councils have pulled this, and I think the campaign group that are taking this forward need to be listened to, but we also most fundamentally need to listen to young people. These were questions that I was asked as a teenager when I was at school, and I didn't face anything like the challenges that young people face now in terms of the levels of online pornography, of online harms. We've got a bill coming to Parliament on that. How can we make good policy, and how can we help support young people to learn about relationships and consent that are so important? The levels of misogyny and violence against women at the moment is an epidemic. And part of that is because we had such poor sex and relationship education. I know what mine was like. It was absolutely appalling pre-devolution. And we have a duty, and a moral duty to young people to make sure we get it right for them. And we will only be able to do that if we have the best possible data.
Miriam?
Well, I've got serious concerns about this. I think it raises some very worrying safeguarding flags. I think to be asking children intimate and intrusive questions from a position of authority and implying to them that they should answer these honestly and, even to strangers potentially, even though it is through a form, and they are identifiable. They have to put their examination reference number on the top of this form. I think that raises some serious red flags. I completely agree that we need to be supporting children and educating them and teaching them about consent, but I worry what it says when we're saying to children as young as 14, it is good, it is right, it is encouraged to reveal intimate details about your sexual activity to somebody in authority. And I think it does, we have to look at the wider context of here. Look at everyone's invited. We know that there are young women being pressured, young girls under the age of consent being pressured into an enormous amount of sexual activity.
And how would we develop policies and laws to protect them if we don't know if it's happening, Miriam?
But a survey asking these kind of
characterisation.
questions, one of the questions asks 14-year-olds, how many times have you had sex in the last... How many people have you had sex with in the last year? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Are we normalising sexual activity in children such that children come away from this survey and think, well, if I'm not doing this, I'm not normal? And my concern is, yes, we do need information about what's happening to our children, but we have to be very, very careful when A, they're identifiable, and B, we're giving them the impression that it's okay to talk about these kind of details with strangers and people in authority.
I think you perhaps misunderstand the way the survey is run. The only reason that the young people who are taking part in the survey are identifiable is so that if they disclose some kind of abuse or issue, they can be identified. Otherwise, it is anonymous, and I understand that may be a concern for people. But to suggest that young people shouldn't be asked these questions when I grew up, at a time when there was young people in my year at school who were 14, 15, 16 and were pregnant. So young people will have these experiences whether you like it or not, and they will be exposed to content, and we need to educate them responsibly and make sure that they know that there is no pressure to do anything, but we can only do that if we have proper, reliable data.
But I think even though that may be the intention of this survey, I think it will have the opposite effect, and that's what worries me.
John?
But Hannah, you wouldn't ask these questions of an adult in a census. When we get the census, I'd feel uncomfortable if I got asked that question by the state. Why are we asking these questions to 14-year-olds that we wouldn't think were appropriate to ask to an adult?
So that we can have appropriate policies and we can support them as they grow up, as they are exposed to, more and more sexualised content, whether it's through video games, whether it's through adverts, whether it's, you know, the content that they consume online. I think, unfortunately, that is a reality today. And if we want to tackle those issues and we want to make sure that young folk are engaged and prepared for the future,
John,
that's the only way we can do that.
I mean, somehow we managed to have appropriate policies for adults without asking them these questions. So why should
do we? I mean, as I said, the rate of violence against women, the rate
do you
of
think we
sexual
should ask the
violence is
questions
an
in the
epidemic.
census then?
I mean, I don't have a problem with being asked those questions if it's for a legitimate reason.
All right, you have a problem, Jess. Your view?
I mean, I think it's a delicate balance to be struck, isn't it? It's obviously better for teenagers to have open and honest conversations about sex, about protection, crucially about consent, and therefore it's probably helpful for health professionals, for teachers, for policymakers to understand what teenagers actually need and want, the real statistics on the ground, not an imagined world as they would wish it to be. And I think the main consent needed here is actually the consent of the teenagers. How do these teens feel about it? Is it intrusive? Do they feel actually like they're likely to be honest on surveys like this? And we know that can probably, with teenagers, go both ways in terms of bragging rights, pretending you've had sex with more people than you have, or feeling ashamed. Will teens worried about being outed by the survey, about things they may never have told their family or friends? I think that's a very delicate issue, and I would like to hear a bit more about what teens in Scotland actually think of this.
I mean, Hannah, some of the councils who are refusing to take this on are SNP ones. Are they burying their heads in the sand too on this?
I think it's the wrong decision, like I've said, but I hope that we can have a discussion about it. People have raised concerns, and it's only right that those concerns are discussed and that we make sure that, not just because there is some people with some concerns that everybody suffers, but that we have a grown-up discussion about it, and we make sure that it can be rolled out and it can be as extensive as possible.
And just briefly before we go, because we're almost at the end of the programme, if you don't have enough in terms of data to deal with, will it only be a partial view guiding your future public policies?
So yeah, that's the risk. I mean, these questions have been being asked of young people since the 90s. Also, very similar questions are asked of young people in England and Wales and most countries in Europe. So I don't really see what the issue is.
That's all we've got time for. Thank you to you, Lucy, for joining us. And just briefly to say, the Prime Minister's been asked about what he knew about Partygate. He has made the same denial as before. We'll have more on that tomorrow's programme at 12:15. Bye-bye.